how do we really understand what's happening in the world, especially with global conflicts?
It's tough. You feel like you're drowning in headlines sometimes.
Exactly, just trying to get beneath the surface. So today, we're doing a deep dive into U.S. foreign policy, but, well, from a really unexpected angle.
Okay.
We're going to unpack the U.S. bombing near Seoul, Iran, under former President Trump. You remember how that just reignited all those debates?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Big arguments about American foreign policy.
Well, for this deep dive, our sources include these excerpts from a, frankly, provocative conversation our field journalist had.
With who?
Dr. Amir Najad. He's an Iranian psychologist, specializes in political trauma, collective memory, and his insights. They're really something else.
A psychologist's take on foreign policy.
It is. Okay, so let's unpack this. What if some of the biggest geopolitical moves aren't quite what they seem? Our mission today, really, is to challenge those conventional understandings. We want to offer the psychological lens, maybe uncover some surprising whys behind it all.
Sounds fascinating. Where do we start? With the Iran strike.
Yes. So our journalist asked Dr. Najad about that strike. The expectation was, he'd say the U.S. was finally walking the talk on nuclear stuff.
Right, the standard line.
But he had a completely different take. Said it wasn't a show of strength at all. He called it, get this, a performance.
A performance, like theater.
Yeah, a theatrical display. So if it's not about strength, not really deterrence, what's he implying? What's the real objective?
And how far back does he trace this? Is this a new thing?
No, that's the key. He traces it way back. He talks about this classic American script: provoke, strike, retreat, and then frame it all as deterrence.
Provoke, strike, retreat, deter.
And he says this pattern goes back to the Cold War.
Wow. So this is just about recent events for him. This is a long-term pattern.
Exactly. Which makes you think, right, how does that challenge your view of these military actions? What if what looks like strength is something else?
Well, it completely reframes it, doesn't it? And you said he's a psychologist. So he's looking at the underlying psychology.
Precisely. What's fascinating here is how he reframes these conflicts, not just strategy, but reflections of a nation's inner state.
Inner state, how so?
He called it psychological projection. He argued America basically externalizes its internal turmoil.
Okay.
Uses foreign threats like mirrors for its own insecurity. That's his phrase.
Mirrors for its own insecurity. That's quite a statement.
And he gave examples: Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. He didn't just see them as wars. He called them unresolved identity crises.
So the conflicts are symptoms of something deeper within the U.S. itself, in his view.
That's his argument, which, is a huge claim. But then you look at how he talks about Iran's role.
Go on.
He acknowledges the tension, obviously, but then he flips it. He says Iran isn't the true enemy.
Not the true enemy. Then what?
It's what he calls the manageable adversary.
Manageable adversary. What does that mean?
It sounds like. Well, he's implying it's less about the actual threat Iran poses and more about some internal need within the U.S.
Right. He argued America seems to need constant motion, constant conflict, really, to keep its war machinery relevant.
The military-industrial complex idea?
Sort of, but with a psychological twist. Iran, he thinks, provides just enough defiance to justify that momentum.
Okay.
But not enough power to actually threaten America's existence. It's manageable.
And he called this therapeutic.
Yeah, therapeutic,
like
a catharsis for the U.S.
Wow. So the conflict itself serves a purpose, almost regardless of the specifics.
That seems to be his point. And he broadens it out. It's not just Iran. Any non-nuclear state that's defiant enough could become, as he put it, the enemy of the season.
The enemy of the season. That implies a kind of rotation, doesn't it?
It does. A cycle.
So what does this mean for how we understand, tensions right now around the globe? It suggests this deeper, almost cyclical need is driving things.
And he didn't just theorize.
Yeah.
He brought up historical examples.
What?
Well, Iraq in 2003. He argued the war happened even without WMDs because, quote, the narrative was more valuable than the truth.
The story was more important than the facts on the ground.
That's the implication. And Afghanistan, 20 years of war, the Taliban comes back.
Yeah.
He didn't see these as just miscalculations.
What then?
He called them part of a deeper psychological loop.
A loop, like we're stuck repeating something.
Yes. And he stressed this isn't irrational behavior in his view. It's almost instinctual.
Instinctual.
He claims the U.S., after World War II, developed what he called a paranoid power syndrome.
Paranoid power syndrome.
A kind of global distrust that got hardwired into its foreign policy.
Hardwired.
So that recent Iran strike,
Yeah.
he said it wasn't really aimed at Tehran. It was more like reassurance to Washington itself.
Reassuring itself. So if we connect the dots here, he's painting this picture of an ingrained national psychology that's driving foreign policy, almost separate from the specific threat.
That's the core of it. It's a powerful and, frankly, quite disturbing idea if you think about it.
Definitely. So how do you break a cycle like that if it's so deep, so instinctual, as he says?
Well, his suggestion was that America needs to learn to trust a multipolar world.
Trust other powers more.
But he was clear. That requires a fundamental psychological transformation. It's not just about changing policies on paper.
A shift in mindset, not just strategy.
Exactly. And here's another twist he added.
Okay.
He believes Iran knows this game, too.
Knows the game.
They provoke, but carefully. They don't cross certain lines. And they actually use American aggression to rally their own people, to unify internally.
So it becomes a sort of symbiotic, if dysfunctional, relationship.
In a way, yes. Which brings up a really tough question for all of us.
Oh, yeah.
How do you shift these deeply ingrained national behaviors, especially when they're tied up with something as basic as national security?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? It's incredibly complex. Now, our journalist did push back a bit, asked a key moral question.
Oh, God.
Isn't America defending democracy? Isn't that the justification?
The democracy promotion argument. What did Nejad say to that?
His response was pretty striking. Can you share that?
He said, and I'm quoting roughly here, defense is noble, but perpetual war becomes indistinguishable from conquest.
Perpetual war looks like conquest.
He elaborated, saying when democracy is used to justify preemptive violence, violence before an attack happens.
Yeah.
It basically turns into a tool of control.
A tool of control. Can you give an analogy for that? It's a strong claim.
Sure. It's maybe like a parent who says they're teaching discipline through constant, really aggressive control.
Okay.
At some point, you look at it and think, is this really guidance? Or is it just suppression? The line gets blurred. The justification doesn't match the action anymore.
That makes sense. That captures his point really well. Okay, so towards the end of the conversation, Dr. Nejad talked about the East, China, and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
What was his take there?
He described them as basically watching silently.
Silently, as opposed to what he sees as America's more reactive aggression. He painted them as patient.
Patiently, waiting.
Waiting for America to exhaust itself. That was his phrase.
Wow. Waiting for the U.S. to burn out from its own actions.
Yeah. And he predicted not a world war, not like the old kind.
What's that?
He predicted an endless series of war performances.
War performances. Like the Iran strike he mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Symbolic conflicts, economic battles, psychological warfare, constant low-level friction, maybe, rather than all-out conflict.
So a different kind of struggle altogether.
It seems so. Look, Dr. Nejad's perspective, it's clearly distinct, it's challenging. This idea of U.S. foreign policy as a kind of psychological performance, driven more by internal stuff than external threats, it really makes you think.
It absolutely does.
And he left our journalist and us with this really powerful final thought. He said, we're already at war, not with bullets, but with meaning.
Not with bullets, but with meaning. That's profound, and it leads perfectly into our final thought for you, the listener. Just consider that idea. How narratives, how perceptions, how even a nation's own self-image, how powerful are those forces? Maybe just as potent, maybe more potent than tanks and missiles in actually shaping what happens globally, shaping our future.
What if the real battleground is actually in our minds?
A sobering thought to end on.
Definitely a lot to mull over there. As always, we encourage you, stay curious. Keep looking beyond the headlines, beyond the surface.